Hey there! It's hard to believe that I have 10 plus years of professional coding experience. I still feel like a new developer at my company, but whenever I look at new developers' code, I can see that I've come a long way and I've learned a lot. There are some overarching lessons that I've learned about being a developer, and I'll be going over them in this video. And what I'm going to be sharing are some big picture ideas, and hopefully these big picture ideas will help you know what you need to focus on and know what to do to become a better programmer. Over the years, I've had exposure to many different kinds of technology, software, programming languages, and programming tools. In my first job, I was in research, so I had a very general programming experience across a wide range of technologies. And then in my second job, it was in product development, so I had these more complex, more sophisticated code bases, and I had to learn them and learn how to build on top of them. If I were to share advice to my younger self at the beginning of my career, this is what I would tell him. And in this video, I'll be going over what your first few years of programming will look like, the most underrated difficulty at your job, and then lastly, what is the easiest and fastest way to get better at programming. Alright, let's discuss. My name's Henrik, and I'm here to teach you how to build your own applications, stress less, build more, save time, and improve lives and the lives of others. Alright, but before we begin, I would like to mention that I have a guide, a free guide called my Personalized Finance App Programming Guide. Basically, in this guide what you'll do is you'll take your credit card transactions and then categorize them in different budget categories so you know how much you're spending. It's a free guide, it's a 12-step guide, and you can see it in the link in the description. And if you download it and pay attention to what it says, you'll definitely learn some fundamental programming concepts. Alright, lesson 1 is that your first coding tasks are not going to require you to build an application from scratch. And it's kind of obvious because when you get hired, they're hiring you to develop on top of something that they already have. I work in DSP, and when I first started working, I thought I was going to be designing filters because that's what we learned in school. We learned how to design filters and then put them together. But then when I got to my job, I realized they were already programmed 15-20 years ago, and they were already optimized. So there's not much I can do in terms of designing them. And in my job, all they wanted me to do was put these filters together and develop some new features from them. And why am I mentioning this? It's because every time I look online and I see people trying to learn how to code, it seems like they want to learn the whole system. They want to learn all the minor things, and they stress themselves out so much that they need to learn this thing about this product, or this thing about this language, this thing about this language, and this thing about this language. But you really don't need to know everything. And when you start working at your job, there'll be people who are specialized at different parts of the product. So when you start working, you only have to focus on one part of the code base. And sometimes when you start working, they may ask you to code in a language that you don't have experience in. For example, in my background, I only knew C. But when I went to my first job, they asked me to code in C++. And then after that, they gave me a new project, and then I started to code in Python. And then after that, I started to code in Java. And I never had experience with those before, but they needed me to do that. And then in my second job, I only had those coding experience, but the language they asked me to code in was C#. So I went there and then I coded in C#. But now I'm back to working in C. But all that to say is, I think people, they focus so much on the small details in terms of programming, and then they get so stressed out. And then when you start to go to your job, you may never have to touch that kind of code again. It's useful to know how to get set up and how to build an application from scratch. But when you start working at a company, there's already a piece of code there. There's already a code base there and a system, and then they're just going to ask you to learn that system and build on top of it. So all that to say is, be careful focusing too much attention on very niche programming tools and ideas and languages. And speaking of code bases, this leads into the second lesson, which is that the hardest part of your job is going to be learning the code base that you're given. And this is important because if you're going to build new features on top of a code base, you obviously have to understand the code base. And then the more you understand it, the easier it becomes to implement certain features that your company is asking you to do. And something to say about code bases is you may never fully understand the code base that you're given. You will understand parts of it, but not the whole thing. Even the ones that your department is responsible for. Like, I've been at my company for 3+ years, and when I look at the code base, I only know certain parts of it, but not all of it. And even people that have been at the company for 10, 15 years, sometimes I would look at a part of the code base and I would ask them questions about it, and then they would say they don't know that much about that part of the code base. There are two parts of code bases that you need to understand. The first part is code syntax, and then the second part is program design. And in code syntax, what that means is just understanding how the programming language works. For example, I had a background in C, then when I went to my company, I was seeing try-catch blocks. And I never learned try-catch blocks in C, but I was seeing it in Java. So I had to learn what is a try-catch block, how does it work? And another thing was in Python, there were these callback functions, and then I had no idea what a callback function was, and so I had to learn what a callback function was, how it works. And then another one is in C#, I had to learn what delegates were. So there are different nuances of different programming languages, different philosophies, and so you kind of had to learn those things in order to understand the code, and that's called the code syntax. And then the program design, that's how all the different parts of your code works together. And basically a big part of program design is understanding what these variables mean, because all a program is it takes in data and then it processes the data and gives you some data. Program design is all about seeing how these variables and how this data logic works together. And you have to understand, what is your company trying to do with this data? What does the data represent? And what kind of data output are they trying to get from this code? I think the hardest part about program design is understanding what each of the variables are doing. And for this, you will need an IDE that allows you to track where the variables are being used, because a lot of times your variables will be in one file, but then it's going to be used in other files. And for you to understand how the program works, you need an IDE to know how this variable is being used. And for example, even with functions, you need to understand how these functions are being used too, and where it's being called. So that's when an IDE that can help you with searching comes in handy. Code syntax, like the delegates, the callback function, and the try-catch block, those can be hard to understand at first, but once you understand them, it's pretty straightforward. I'd say the hardest part about programming at my jobs, was the program design, because you will see tons of variables, tons of functions, and you have no idea what they mean, you have no idea what they're used for. And a lot of times what I've done in my companies is I would ask people questions, and I think having a high-level understanding of the code is the most important thing, because when you have a high-level understanding of the code, then you'll know which parts of the code base you can ignore and which parts of the code base probably have what you need to start focusing on. Something that I used to do was I would ask one senior programmer about a part of the code base, and then I don't want to bother him too much, so I would ask another senior programmer and ask him some questions, and then I would kind of rotate, ask each one of them like one question a day. And then say there's 3 more senior programmers around me, I would ask one question a day, then I have three new insights per day, and then work for five days in a week. That's 15 new insights. So that's how you start to get more of a high-level understanding of the code. Documentation is also important, and you can learn a lot about the code by what other programmers have written about their code, but sometimes you can't rely on it, because programmers sometimes they don't document their code very well, and sometimes documentation's hard because there's a lot of it. There's like 50, maybe hundreds of pages of documentation, and you don't know where to look. But that's where more senior programmers or more experienced programmers can point out to you which parts of the documentation to focus on. This comes to our last lesson. That is, the fastest and easiest way to get better at programming is by surrounding yourself with better programmers and working alongside of them. A lot of times in my programming journey, in my career, I've coded things by myself, but the most I've grown is when I was coding on the same project with another engineer who was a lot better than me. It's like any other skill, right? If you play basketball, I play basketball. If you play basketball with the same people and they're not really that good, you're not gonna get good. But when you start playing basketball with people who are really, really good, then you start to get better. You start to develop some better IQ when it comes to playing basketball or when it comes to playing music. If you play music with the same people, you're not really going to grow. But when you start playing with more experienced musicians, then you'll start learning more musical ideas and then get better at your instrument. And that's what happened with me. That's how I got better at programming. The first time I got better at programming was when we started doing code reviews, because we were developing a product together, and we would all code our tasks. We would have tasks, and then we would code these different features or different bug fixes, and then we would ask someone else to do a code review. And a code review is the first place where another programmer was looking at my code, and then they were looking, an older programmer was looking at my code, and then he would point out all these things. And sometimes I thought my program was perfect, and a lot of times it was functional, it was already working. But then when my more senior programmer looked at it, he started pointing out all the different parts where I had bad coding practices, and I learned a lot from that. There was also another guy that I worked with. I had to code certain things. I had like these things that my company wanted me to do, and then when I was trying to implement it, I didn't have an idea of how to implement it. So I often asked a more senior coworker his ideas or his thoughts, and he would always, one of them who was really helpful, he didn't give me the solution right away, or he didn't tell me what I should do right away. He asked me questions. He would say, "Henrik, what do you think you need to do? What are some parts of your program that you need? What kinds of things do you need your program to have?" And I think just having that kind of person to help me think through my program design, that really helped me grow in terms of my programming skills. I do a lot of code reviews myself, not only at my job, but also I help younger, more new programmers, and I look at their code, and then when I look at their code, it actually looks good at first glance when I first look at it, and it works. I run it and it works. But then when I start to look at it more deeply, then I can start to see some bad coding practices, and also see some places where their code can be more efficient. And a lot of things I see is a lot of times new coders, they have a lot of redundant code. And that comes from a lot of experience that I've had. I'm able to identify redundant code and inefficient code, and I can point these out to these new developers. And I'm still learning a lot at my company. I work with more senior developers as well, and they're still teaching me a lot of things. And I'm also learning things from younger people too at my company. And so learning never stops. But I think the main idea here is you should always learn in a community. It's hard to learn self-learn programming, and then you think you can just learn everything just by watching videos or watching tutorials. But you start to grow faster if you surround yourself with other people. Alright, so those are the 3 big lessons that I've learned from 10 plus years of coding experience. The first one is you probably won't be expected to code an application from scratch. Your company will probably give you a code base, and then you have to build on top of that. And then the second one is the hardest part of the job is understanding that code base. And once you start understanding that code base, implementing new things on top of that is really easy, really fast. And then the third one is the easiest and the fastest way to get better at programming is by working alongside someone who's better than you. Alright, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Which of these 3 lessons was really helpful for you in terms of helping you become a better programmer? Maybe you need to focus less on some minor things and need to focus on more general, broad programming concepts. Or maybe you need to find somebody who you can work with. Maybe you need a programming buddy or a programming community that can look at your code, do some code reviews, and maybe that's what you need to do to get better at programming. Leave a comment, I'll be sure to read them. And if you have any questions or if you want me to cover anything else, leave a comment and I'll be sure to address them and try to help you and help make content that helps you out. And again, if you haven't downloaded my personalized finance app programming guide, I recommend that you download it because it's a really fun application. It's a really fun project, and most importantly, you'll be seeing the way I approach it. And when you see how I approach the project, it's kind of like I'm working with you, and you see a more senior developer working alongside of you, and then you can get that kind of feedback. And also you can ask me questions. So if you like how I would ask questions from the more senior programmers, you can ask me a question as you go through my personalized finance app programming guide. The link is in the description if you haven't downloaded it yet. Alright, thanks for making it to the end of this video. I really appreciate you, and thanks for listening to what I had to say. I hope it really helps you and helps you get better at programming, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.